a single hilltop in Turkey, holds a secret that rewrites human history. The ancient site of forces us to rethink everything we thought we knew about how civilization began. By the end of our journey, you will see the entire timeline of human achievement in a completely new light. What could have compelled hunter-gatherers to erect towering stone monuments thousands of years before farming or cities? And why was their greatest masterpiece deliberately buried? This discovery challenges the very foundations of archaeology. What does it truly take to build a civilization? Those first clues emerged from the earth because a man simply looked down. In the 1960s, a shepherd tending his flock on a windswept hill in southeastern Turkey kept noticing something odd. His sheep would scatter around particular spots, and when he went to look, he found smooth stones, clearly worked by human hands, poking through the dry soil. The local Kurdish people called the place, which translates to hill, a name that perfectly captured its unremarkable, rounded shape. For decades, those stones were just a curiosity, a minor footnote in archaeological surveys noted and then largely set aside. The hill kept its secret because no one was yet prepared to see what it truly was. The established story of human progress was too convincing, too tidy, to be challenged by a few strange rocks in a remote field. It would take a specific kind of vision, a willingness to question the entire narrative, to finally listen to what the hill was whispering. That vision belonged to a German archaeologist named. In 1995, having reviewed those old survey reports, stood on that same hill. He looked at the limestone slabs the shepherd had seen, and he looked at the vast, quiet landscape around him. While others saw little of note, felt a profound certainty. He later said he knew instantly, within minutes of arriving, that this was not a settlement or a burial ground, but something entirely different and monumental. His team began to dig, and the earth began to give up its wonders. Enormous, T-shaped pillars of stone, each weighing many tons, were slowly revealed, arranged in great circular enclosures. The stone was intricately carved with a menagerie of ancient animals: foxes, scorpions, wild boars, and immense birds. The craftsmanship was stunning, but the date was impossible. Initial analysis placed the construction of these enclosures around 11,500 years ago. This was a date that shattered the timeline. It meant these pillars were erected thousands of years before the invention of writing, thousands of years before the wheel, and a staggering 6,000 years before Stonehenge. Initial intuition was not just correct, it was revolutionary. The discovery underscored a beautiful truth about history, that our greatest revelations often lie hidden in plain sight, waiting not for advanced technology, but for a shift in perspective. For someone brave enough to say that the story we have always told ourselves might be wrong, the impossible date carved into those pillars demanded the first great rethinking. For generations, archaeologists had a clear, logical sequence for how civilization emerged. First, humans mastered agriculture, learning to plant seeds and domesticate animals. This created a reliable food surplus, which allowed people to settle permanently in one place. With settlement came specialization, social hierarchies, and eventually, complex societies with the resources and leadership to undertake massive building projects. Monumentality, the drive to create structures larger than life, was seen as the grand finale of this process, a symbol of what a mature, settled society could achieve. Stood this elegant timeline completely on its head. Here were the most ambitious stone monuments ever discovered from the ancient world, erected not at the end of that process, but right at the very beginning, long before farming villages or pottery. The builders were, by all conventional definitions, hunter-gatherers. This single fact forces a profound question. What if we have the story backwards? What if the urge to build something monumental, to gather for a shared spiritual or social purpose, actually came first? The labor involved is staggering to contemplate. Each T-shaped pillar, some standing over 16 feet tall and weighing more than 10 tons, was from solid limestone bedrock nearby. Using only stone tools, these prehistoric workers had to detach the monolith, transport it hundreds of yards up the hill, and then erect it precisely within a circular enclosure, often setting it into a prepared floor socket. This was not a casual weekend project for a small family group. It required planning, coordination, and the sustained effort of many people over a long period. It implies a level of social organization, a shared vision, and a chain of command that textbooks never attributed to nomadic peoples. This suggests the catalyst for complex society may not have been an economic one, like storing grain, but a social or spiritual one. A powerful collective dream that brought people together and taught them how to organize. The timeline of human achievement, it turns out, is not a simple straight line from simple to complex. It is a web where the drive to create meaning and community might well have been the first spark that lit the fire of civilization itself. This leads us directly to the second, even more startling rethinking, the catalyst for agriculture itself. The story we have long accepted is often called the Neolithic Revolution. It is a clean, logical tale of human ingenuity. People discovered they could plant seeds and domesticate animals, creating a reliable food source. This agricultural surplus then freed some individuals from the daily hunt, allowing them to become specialists, priests, artists, and builders. In this story, agriculture builds the temple. Whispers a different possibility, one where the temple built agriculture. Think about the practical demands of the site. Constructing those immense stone circles was not a task for a handful of people. It required a large, sustained workforce, likely drawn from different hunter-gatherer groups across the region. These people needed to be fed, and for more than just a day or two. The hilltop itself, however, was not a place of natural abundance. Studies show its immediate surroundings were not the lush, wild fields ideal for early experimentation with crops. Yet, fascinatingly, sits right in the heart of the Fertile Crescent, the very region where genetic evidence tells us wild wheat and barley were first domesticated into the staples that would feed the world. This geographical coincidence is too powerful to ignore. A compelling theory now suggests that the need to feed these periodic gatherings of builders and celebrants may have been the driving force behind the intentional cultivation of wild grains. The logic is profoundly human. If you are responsible for organizing a large communal project, a feast, or a ceremony, you cannot rely solely on the unpredictable bounty of the hunt or foraging. You need a predictable, storable resource. What if the groups coming to the hill began to deliberately nurture patches of wild grasses nearby, to protect them and encourage their growth, ensuring a supply of grain for the next gathering? This small, practical step, born from a social and ritual need, could have been the very first push down the path to full-scale farming. It reframes one of humanity's greatest innovations. The domestication of plants may not have begun as a purely economic calculation for survival, but as a solution to a logistical problem created by a shared spiritual vision. The desire to come together, to create something larger than themselves, may have literally taught people how to manipulate their environment in a new and permanent way. This places communal belief and ceremony not at the periphery of human progress, but at its very heart, as the spark that ignited the chain reaction leading to settled life. But how could such a monumental task be accomplished without a king to command it? This brings us to the third, and perhaps most profound, rethinking forced upon us by the very nature of early social organization. The scale of labor here is almost incomprehensible. Quarrying, moving, and erecting dozens of ton pillars, then intricately carving them, was not the work of a single season or a single community. It required the coordinated effort of hundreds of people, sustained not just for years, but likely across many generations. The traditional archaeological model has a ready-made explanation for such feats: centralized authority. We assume a powerful chief or a priestly elite emerged, directing the labor of a settled population from atop a social hierarchy. This top-down control, backed by the promise of reward or the threat of punishment, is how we have long explained the pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. However, offers none of the expected evidence for this kind of society. After decades of excavation, archaeologists have found no grand residential palaces for rulers. There are no vast storage complexes holding the accumulated wealth of an elite class. There are no signs of the severe social stratification we associate with early kingdoms, no district of lavish homes overlooking a district of hovels. The site itself appears to have been used primarily for ritual gatherings, not for daily living. This absence of the usual markers of power points toward a radically different possibility. What if these first complex societies were not built on the foundation of coercive, permanent hierarchy at all? The organization needed to build may have been flexible, temporary, and rooted in shared belief. Imagine different hunter-gatherer bands, each with their own territory and identity, converging on this sacred hill at certain times of the year, perhaps drawn by seasonal migrations or celestial events. They would come together not as subjects obeying a king, but as participants in a shared cultural and spiritual project. Each group might have been responsible for carving a pillar adorned with their own totemic animals, contributing their labor as an act of devotion and a demonstration of their place within a larger, imagined community. This form of cooperation is ritual-based, not state-enforced. It suggests that humanity's first large-scale collaborations were fueled not by top-down commands, but by a collective buy-in to a powerful, unifying idea. The ability to organize complex labor without the apparatus of a permanent state challenges a deep-seated assumption in our understanding of civilization. It proposes that hierarchy and coercive power are not the inevitable starting points for monumental achievement. Instead, they may be later developments, choices made as societies grew larger and more settled. Perhaps long after people had already proven they could accomplish the extraordinary simply by agreeing on a common purpose. This view of our past is not just about how stones were moved, but about how people related to one another. It opens a window onto a world where large-scale cooperation could be voluntary, seasonal, and sacred, a form of social glue that predates and perhaps even precluded the need for kings and castles. Yet the most captivating mystery is not how it was built, but why. The carvings covering the pillars offer our clearest window into the minds of the builders, and they reveal a world where belief was the most powerful force of all. For much of modern archaeology, the story of human progress has been told through a lens of practical necessity. The driving forces were environmental pressure, the search for food, and the economics of survival. Great changes, it was thought, came from tangible needs. A place devoid of houses, hearths, or storage pits challenges that materialist perspective at its core. Here, the primary investment of immense labor was not for shelter, defense, or harvest, but for something entirely intangible, for ritual and for belief. The site itself is an argument carved in stone, stating that the human capacity for symbolic thought and shared ideology is not a byproduct of civilization, but quite possibly its very catalyst. Look closely at the menagerie frozen in the limestone. These are not images of docile, domesticated creatures. They are foxes, scorpions, snakes, wild boars, and fierce birds of prey. They represent a world of power, danger, and wildness. Their placement on the monolithic T-pillars, which many researchers interpret as stylized human forms, suggests a profound symbolic relationship. Perhaps these animals were guardians, ancestral spirits, or totemic representations of different clans gathering at the site. The carvings point to a rich symbolic universe, a complex mythology that gave meaning to the natural world and to humanity's place within it. This was likely a form of early communal religion, perhaps shamanistic in nature, where ritual specialists mediated between the human community and the spirit world represented by these powerful beasts. This symbolic richness forces a fourth and deeply philosophical rethinking. It compels us to consider that the genesis of complex society may lie not in the stomach, but in the mind and the soul. The coordinated labor of hundreds of people across generations was not mobilized by a king's decree, but by a shared story. A common belief in powerful forces, in ancestral mandates, or in cosmic cycles provided the social glue and the motivational fuel for this colossal undertaking. The human mind's ability to believe in things unseen, to subscribe to a collective narrative, proved to be a force as concrete and world-shaping as any tool or technology. Ideas and myths were the first blueprints. They provided the reason to cooperate on a scale never before attempted, transforming scattered bands into a temporary but highly organized community with a single, sacred purpose. In this light stands as a monumental testament to the power of belief. It shows us that long before written doctrine or formal institutions, the human urge to make meaning, to connect with something larger than oneself, could literally move mountains. The pillars are not merely ancient art or architecture, they are the physical crystallization of a shared dream. They remind us that the foundations of our world are built as much on stories as on stone, and that the most enduring structures often begin not with a calculation of resources, but with a leap of faith made by an entire community. This realization shifts our understanding of human nature itself, suggesting that our drive to create meaning is not a luxury that followed survival, but may have been the very engine that allowed us to thrive. These silent monoliths are the physical proof, the undeniable architecture of a new paradigm. To walk among the excavated enclosures of is to stand inside a blueprint for a forgotten world. The core of the site is not a single temple, but a series of distinct, monumental spaces. Archaeologists have identified several of these structures, each one a carefully constructed enclosure defined by a ring of massive, T-shaped limestone pillars. These pillars, some standing over 18 feet tall and weighing more than 16 tons, are embedded into sturdy stone walls, creating a sacred space that feels both enclosed and open to the sky. At the very heart of each circle, two even larger pillars rise from the center, towering over the surrounding ring. This layout is not random. It is a repeated, intentional design, a pattern etched into the landscape across multiple structures over centuries. The consistency of this plan is a clue in itself. It tells us that the builders were not improvising. They were following a template, a shared architectural vision that held profound meaning for them. This was a sacred geometry understood across generations, a physical prayer repeated in stone. But how did they achieve this with technology that, by our old understanding, should not have existed? The engineering challenge is breathtaking. Each of these colossal pillars was from the solid limestone bedrock of the plateau itself, using only tools made of flint. Imagine the patience and skill required to detach a block of stone that size using stone hammers and bone chisels. Then, without the wheel and without domesticated animals like oxen to pull them, these ton pillars had to be moved several hundred yards up a gentle slope to their precise positions on the hilltop. The most likely method involved a combination of log rollers, ropes made from plant fibers, and the coordinated muscle power of dozens, if not hundreds, of people. This was a feat of logistics and social coordination, as much as it was a feat of strength. It required planners, foremen, and skilled craftsmen who knew exactly how to handle stone, how to balance weight, and how to direct a team. This knowledge was not invented anew by each generation. It had to be carefully taught and passed down, a curriculum of practical engineering sustained solely through oral tradition and hands-on practice for hundreds of years. This transmission of sophisticated technique across centuries is a testament to the cultural stability and shared purpose of these people. Yet the architecture holds an even deeper mystery. Each of these magnificent enclosures, after being used for what may have been decades or even centuries, was deliberately and meticulously buried. The spaces were filled with thousands of tons of soil, rubble, and stone chips, effectively entombing the pillars and their carvings. This was not an act of destruction or abandonment. It was a careful, ritual closure. The fill material itself contains clues, like fragments of tools and animal bones, suggesting the burial was part of a final ceremony. This practice transforms our understanding of the site from a static building into a living process. The architecture was not meant to stand forever exposed. It's included a sacred end, a return to the earth. This deliberate burial may have been the most important phase of all, a symbolic act of completion, renewal, or offering that we are only beginning to decipher. The physical layout, therefore, is more than just evidence of advanced skill. It is the frozen framework of a belief system. The central pillars might represent watchful ancestors or deities. The surrounding ring could symbolize a community or the cosmos itself. The act of building, using, and then burying an enclosure could mirror cycles of life, death, and rebirth. These stone circles are not merely buildings. They are three-dimensional myths, the physical stage upon which the rituals that bound this early society together were performed. Every ton of moved stone, every precise carving, and every basket of earth used to fill the circle speaks of a world where spiritual meaning was the most powerful force. Strong enough to organize labor across generations and leave a message in the landscape that would wait 12,000 years to be read. To understand the builders, we must learn to read their language, a vocabulary not of words but of stone and symbol. Carved across the smooth surfaces of the T-pillars is an entire menagerie from a forgotten world. Foxes slink in elegant curves, snakes coil with latent energy. Wild boars charge with palpable force, and immense birds, likely cranes, stand with a serene, watchful presence. Scorpions and lions complete this Stone Age bestiary, each creature rendered with a striking attention to detail that speaks of intimate observation. These are not the docile figures of a pastoral scene. Every animal depicted is wild, powerful, and often dangerous, masters of the untamed landscape that surrounded the hill. This choice is profoundly telling. It suggests a people whose identity and cosmology were woven from the fabric of the wild itself. Their world was not one of separation from nature, but of constant interaction and perhaps negotiation with its most potent forces. The carvings feel less like decorations and more like declarations, a way to capture and perhaps harness the essence of these creatures by bringing their forms into the sacred space. Scholars peer into this silent stone zoo, trying to decipher its meaning, and several compelling interpretations emerge. One prominent theory sees these animals as totems. In this view, each creature could represent a different clan or family group that journeyed to. The fox pillar might have been the contribution and identifier of the fox clan, the crane pillar that of the crane people. This would make the enclosures not just temples, but maps of a social landscape. A physical testament to a coalition of different groups who set aside their individual identities to collaborate on a shared spiritual endeavor. Another perspective views the animals as guardians or spiritual entities. Positioned on what many believe are stylized human forms, the creatures could be protective spirits, ancestral guides, or powerful allies from a mythic realm. The scorpion might ward off evil, the lion might embody strength, and the great bird might symbolize a connection to the heavens. They are less symbols of the people themselves, and more symbols of the forces those people revered and sought to appease or incorporate. What is most significant is what we do not see. There are no images of domesticated plants or animals, no scenes of sowing seeds or herding sheep. The iconography is a mirror held up to a pre-agricultural mind, reflecting a universe where human destiny was still deeply entangled with the rhythms and rulers of the wild. This provides our rarest glimpse, a verbal window into the symbolic thinking of people who lived 12,000 years ago. It is a language without a dictionary, but its grammar is one of relationship, power, and reverence. These carvings tell us that long before they wrote laws or built cities, humans were constructing elaborate mental worlds, populating them with meaning, and then laboring for generations to give that invisible world a permanent physical home. The stones therefore, are not just an architectural marvel. They are the pages of humanity's oldest surviving book, a sacred text where every chapter is written in the shape of a beast, telling a story of a time when the border between the human community and the wild was not a wall, but a conversation etched in limestone. But what, or who, do these silent stone figures truly represent? Look closely at the iconic T-shaped pillars, and a startling possibility emerges. Many researchers now see them not as abstract monuments, but as stylized human forms. The shape itself offers the first clue. The broad horizontal capstone sits atop a narrow vertical shaft, creating a powerful silhouette that can easily be read as a head upon shoulders. This interpretation moves from suggestive to compelling when you examine the finer details. On several of the pillars, you can find shallow carvings that depict arms, bent at the elbow, with hands resting purposefully on the front of the pillar, as if holding the waist. Below these arms, other etchings suggest belts or loincloths, clear markers of human attire. These are not random decorations. They are intentional signs, a symbolic language telling us that these towering stones are meant to be seen as beings. If this reading is correct, it fundamentally transforms our experience of the space. The enclosures are not just circles of stone, they are congregations. Each ring becomes a gathering of silent, watchful figures, perhaps ancestral guardians or deities, presiding over the rituals performed in the central space between them. This abstraction is itself a mark of sophisticated thought. The artists moved beyond simply carving a realistic human form. They distilled the essence of a person into a powerful, repeatable symbol, a T-shape that could be recognized and understood across generations. This shift from naturalistic representation to symbolic form signals a leap in cognitive and artistic development. It shows a society capable of shared abstract concepts, of agreeing that a simple shape could stand in for a complex idea like an ancestor, a leader, or a god. Suddenly, the architecture takes on a profound new layer of meaning. The two central pillars, the largest in each enclosure, might represent particularly important individuals, perhaps mythic founders or primary deities. The surrounding ring of slightly smaller T-pillars could then symbolize a community of lesser figures, a council of elders, or a lineage of honored dead. This arrangement creates a sacred hierarchy in stone, a physical model of a social or spiritual order. The space within the circle is no longer empty ground. It becomes a stage for interaction between the living community and this eternal stone assembly. Every ritual performed there was done in the presence of these figures, under their watchful gaze. This transforms from a monument into a meeting place, a bridge between worlds where the living could commune with the represented powers of their universe. It suggests that the primary purpose of this colossal effort was to create a permanent home for invisible beings, to give form to the formless forces that govern their lives, and to anchor their beliefs in the unshakable reality of stone. This deliberate burial is perhaps the site's most haunting and eloquent mystery. After generations of labor had raised these majestic stone circles into the sky, the same society chose, with equal care, to return them to the earth. Each enclosure was systematically filled, not with trash or debris, but with thousands of tons of clean soil, limestone chips, and rubble. This was a massive undertaking in its own right, requiring a coordinated effort that rivaled the initial construction. It tells us this was not an act of neglect or fear. It was a final, sacred phase of the structure's life. Think of the process. Teams of people would have carried basket after basket of material, carefully depositing it around and over the towering pillars, slowly entombing the carved animals and silent stone figures, until the entire enclosure was a buried, hidden world. This transforms from a static monument into a living ritual with a defined beginning, middle, and end. So why do it? Why create a masterpiece only to hide it forever? The leading theory is one of ritual closure. In many ancient cultures, sacred objects or spaces were not meant to last forever in the open. They had a When their purpose was fulfilled, or when the ceremonial cycle demanded it, they were retired with honor. Burying the enclosures could have been a symbolic act of giving the temple back to the earth from which its stones were born, a completion of a cosmic circle. It might represent a belief in renewal, that by ceremonially ending one sacred space, the community made way for a new one to be built, perhaps nearby, continuing the cycle. Another possibility is preservation, but not in the way we might think. This wasn't about hiding the site from enemies, as there's no evidence of conflict. Instead, it could have been about protecting the power of the place. By sealing the enclosures, the builders might have been containing their sacred energy, safeguarding the potent symbols and spiritual forces within for eternity, or for a future time they believed would come. It could also have been a form of respectful decommissioning. If the symbols or beliefs associated with a particular set of pillars became outdated, or were tied to a specific lineage that ended, burying that circle neutralized its active power while still honoring its past significance. This practice forces us to rethink the very purpose of monumental architecture. For us, building something like a cathedral is an act of permanence, a legacy meant to stand for centuries. The legacy may have been in the act of building and the act of closing, not in the enduring display. The true monument was the communal effort itself, the shared labor and belief, which was then ceremonially laid to rest. The burial, therefore, is not a puzzling postscript. It is the final, crucial sentence in a long story written in stone and earth. It shows a society with a profound sense of ritual time, viewing their greatest creations not as possessions, but as temporary vessels for a spiritual need. vessels that could be gratefully returned to the landscape when their work was done. In this light, the hill is not a cemetery for temples, but a garden where sacred ideas were planted, allowed to bloom in stone, and then returned to the soil, completing a cycle of meaning that we are only beginning to understand. The evidence of what they ate is etched in bone. Among the thousands of animal remains found in the fill of the enclosures, archaeologists have identified a clear menu. Gazelle, aurochs, which are the massive wild ancestors of cattle, and wild ass. These are all wild hunted species. There is a complete absence of domesticated sheep, goats, or cattle bones. This dietary snapshot is a powerful confirmation. The people who built these marvels were, by every traditional definition, hunter-gatherers. They lived off the land, following the migrations of herds and the seasonal cycles of wild plants. But this simple label now feels utterly inadequate. These were not simple foragers living hand to mouth. They were hunter-gatherer engineers, master planners who operated on a scale that defies our old assumptions. Think of the immense coordination required. To feed the hundreds of workers gathered for a building season, they needed a predictable supply of meat. This suggests highly organized hunting parties, perhaps operating far from the site, with sophisticated techniques to take down large, dangerous game like aurochs. The meat would then need to be processed, preserved, and transported to the hilltop to sustain the workforce. This points to a society with advanced logistical knowledge, an understanding of food storage, and a network of communication that could mobilize labor and resources across a wide region. They were not just reacting to their environment, they were managing it with foresight to support a grand, non-essential goal. This forces a dramatic expansion of what we mean by a hunter-gatherer society. They were not merely small, isolated bands. Reveals a pattern of seasonal coalescence. For much of the year, these people likely lived in smaller, mobile groups across the landscape, hunting and gathering. But at certain times, perhaps dictated by celestial events or ceremonial cycles, they would converge on this sacred hill. For weeks or months, this temporary community would swell into a large, organized settlement with a singular purpose: to build. This model blends mobility with monumentality. It shows a sophisticated adaptation where the social structure was fluid, capable of shifting from a dispersed, foraging mode to a concentrated, hierarchical project mode when the ritual calendar demanded it. Their lifestyle was a duality, a rhythm between the solitary track of the hunter and the collective chant of the builder. This reframes spiritual expression not as a leisure activity, but as a central organizing principle of their entire annual cycle and social identity. The hill was the anchor that pulled them together, the fixed point around which their mobile lives revolved. In this light, the term hunter-gatherer does not describe a limitation, but a specific and brilliant strategy that allowed for both survival and transcendence. It was a way of life flexible enough to harness the bounty of the wild, and disciplined enough to channel that energy into carving a permanent dream into the bones of the earth. Yet the ground itself tells another story of what was missing. As archaeologists cleared away the of soil, they expected to find the foundations of a village, the packed earth floors of homes, the circular impressions of storage pits, and the blackened stones of countless cooking hearths. These are the universal fingerprints of a settled community, the quiet background noise of daily life found at nearly every other ancient site from this era onward. They found none of it. The silence was profound. There were no houses huddled together for shelter, no middens piled with the broken pottery and food scraps of family meals, no workshops for crafting everyday tools. This absence speaks as loudly as the towering pillars. It confirms that this was not a place where people lived, it was a place they visited. Functioned as a purely ceremonial center, a regional gathering point for rituals that drew people from across the landscape. This separation is a conceptual leap of staggering importance. For the first time in the archaeological record, we see a clear division between the sacred and the everyday, between the space for living and the space for meaning. The hilltop was a destination, deliberately set apart. People would have journeyed for days, leaving their seasonal camps and familiar territories to converge on this prepared ground. They came not to dwell, but to participate. This transforms our understanding of their social world. It suggests these early societies were capable of holding a shared idea so powerful that it warranted the creation of a dedicated, specialized location for its expression, a location that served no practical, domestic purpose whatsoever. This is the architectural birth of the temple, the church, the mosque, the synagogue. It is the origin point for the idea that some spaces are not for sleeping or eating, but solely for connecting with something beyond the self. That idea is already fully formed, thousands of years before we thought such a concept could exist. The site stands as a blueprint for every sacred space that would follow, a quiet hilltop where humanity first decided that some ground must be kept separate, not for survival, but for the soul. Spent 2 decades listening to the stones, and what they told him reshaped a field. His guiding idea, often called the Cathedral on the Hill hypothesis, was both simple and revolutionary. He proposed that it was not a settlement, but a central sanctuary, a pilgrimage destination for scattered hunter-gatherer bands across hundreds of square miles. These groups would converge on the hill at appointed times, drawn by shared beliefs and a ceremonial calendar. Their gathering had a powerful, tangible purpose to build. The construction of the monumental enclosures was itself the central ritual, a sacred act of collective labor that reinforced social bonds and expressed a common cosmology. This vision turned conventional wisdom inside out. For the catalyst for change was not an individual inventor discovering a wheat seed, but a social machine, a temporary city of believers whose very existence created new needs. Feeding these periodic, large-scale gatherings became a pressing logistical challenge. How do you provide for hundreds of people concentrated in one place, away from their usual foraging grounds, for weeks or months at a time? Argued this social pressure, the need to supply predictable feasts for the builders and celebrants, was the engine that drove experimentation with wild grasses. The sanctuary did not emerge from farming, farming emerged to serve the sanctuary. This placed human desire for meaning, for communal experience, at the very center of the Neolithic transition. Ideology and social cohesion were not byproducts of a new economy, they were the primary forces that sparked it. Its work fundamentally reoriented the quest for civilizations' origins. It shifted the gaze from the fertile river valleys, where the first farms would later flourish, to these symbolic high places, where the first great ideas took root. The most profound changes, he suggested, began not with a plow in the soil, but with a shared dream in the minds of people who looked at a bare hill and saw a cathedral waiting to be born. The true magnitude of lies hidden beneath the very soil that preserved it. While our eyes can only see the handful of breathtaking circles unearthed so far, technology allows us to peer deeper, revealing a secret landscape. Using ground-penetrating radar and geomagnetic surveys, scientists have scanned the entire 22-acre hilltop. The results are nothing short of staggering. The data reveals the distinct, circular signatures of at least 20 more monumental enclosures, still completely buried, waiting silently in the earth. Scattered among them are the ghostly outlines of countless smaller structures, perhaps workshops, temporary shelters, or auxiliary shrines. This hidden city of stone transforms our understanding completely. The awe-inspiring rings we have been discussing, the ones that already shattered our timelines, represent less than 5% of the total site. They are merely the introductory chapter to a story written across the entire hill. This revelation makes the commitment of the builders almost incomprehensible. Constructing a single one of these circles was a generational undertaking, requiring quarrying, carving, transporting, and erecting dozens of ton pillars. To now understand they built not just one, or even four, but potentially 24 or more of these colossal complexes rewrites the scale of their ambition. The project was not a single event. It was a tradition, a sacred practice sustained across centuries and very likely over a full millennium. Imagine a society where the central, unifying project of your culture was to build these monumental rings, one after another, for 1,000 years. That is longer than the Roman Empire lasted. It means knowledge, symbolism, and technical skill were passed down flawlessly from grandparent to child for 40 generations, all in service of this one sacred hill. This was not a fleeting experiment. It was the enduring heartbeat of an entire cultural world. The surveys confirm, beyond any doubt, that it was not an isolated anomaly, a strange one-off project by a particularly ambitious group. It was the thriving, pulsating core of a vast ritual complex. This hill was the central stage for an entire region, a destination of profound importance that drew people back season after season, century after century, to build, to worship, and to connect. The implications for early social complexity are now inescapable and profound. Maintaining this scale of coordinated activity across such an immense span of time required a stable, resilient, and highly sophisticated social system. It speaks of a shared ideology so powerful and so compelling that it could organize human labor on a near-industrial scale, not for a decade, but for 1,000 years. The silent data from beneath our feet shouts a simple, transformative truth. The origins of civilization are not just older than we thought. They are deeper, more communal, and far more mysterious. The age of these stones is not a matter of speculation. It is a fact etched in time by the atoms themselves. To understand why is such an undeniable revolution, we must look to the science that anchors it firmly on the human timeline. The key lies in a technique called radiocarbon dating. All living things absorb a faint, natural form of carbon from the atmosphere. When a plant or animal dies, this radioactive carbon begins to decay at a steady, measurable rate, acting like a silent, atomic clock. By analyzing the minuscule amount of this carbon remaining in ancient organic material, scientists can calculate with remarkable precision how long ago that life ended. Archaeologists applied this method to charred plant remains and tiny bone fragments found within the very soil used to fill the enclosures. These materials were sealed in place during the site's ritual burial, giving us a direct timestamp for when the structures were completed and taken out of use. The results are astonishingly consistent. Sample after sample returns dates clustering between 9,600 and 8,200 years before the Common Era. This places the active life of squarely in what is known as the Pre-Pottery Neolithic period, a time when, according to every textbook written just a few decades ago, humans were only just beginning to experiment with settled life. To grasp the sheer scale of this antiquity, consider a few comparisons. The earliest stone circles were already ancient ruins, weathered by thousands of years of wind and sun, by the time the first stones of Stonehenge were being raised in England. They predate the Great Pyramids of Giza by a span of time greater than the entire history of ancient Rome, the Middle Ages, and the modern world combined. This scientific backbone transforms the site from a mysterious anomaly into an unshakable data point. The dating provides the chronological proof that allows researchers to stand with absolute confidence and state that monumentality, the drive to build colossal sacred architecture, came first. It happened before pottery, before metal, and most critically, before the widespread adoption of agriculture. This precise timeline is the anchor that holds the entire revolutionary narrative in place. Without it, could be dismissed as a curious outlier, perhaps misdated or misunderstood. With it, the stones become a fixed point on the map of human history, a beacon that forces us to redraw all the routes that lead to civilization. The story written in the limestone carvings is compelling, but the story written in the decay of carbon atoms is incontrovertible. Together, they tell us that our past is far older and far more imaginative than we ever dreamed. But to truly grasp the radical nature of, we must place it beside its famous contemporaries. Look at the other great Neolithic sites that have long defined our understanding of the era. Jericho, with its famous stone tower and defensive walls, was a densely packed settlement. Its people lived in round mud brick houses, stored harvested grain, and buried their family members beneath the floors of their homes. Another icon presents a hive-like community of houses sharing walls, its interiors adorned with vibrant paintings and plaster reliefs of wild animals. Both of these sites show us the classic Neolithic package, a blend of permanent architecture, early farming, and domestic ritual. They represent a path toward complexity where the focus was inward, on the home, the family, and the security of the stored harvest. Now, hold that image in your mind and turn back to. The contrast could not be more absolute. Here, there are no houses, there are no granaries, there are no domestic burials. Instead of a community investing in walls for defense or plaster for their living rooms, we find a community that invested everything in a shared dream carved into limestone pillars under the open sky. This is not a more primitive version of Jericho. It is something entirely different, a separate trajectory of human development. It reveals that the journey toward civilization was not a single paved road, with everyone marching in lockstep. It was a landscape of branching paths, with different groups experimenting with different combinations of the same basic ingredients: social organization, technology, and belief. Some communities, like those at Jericho, chose to build walls and storehouses, turning their energy toward securing a settled life. The people of chose a different priority. They channeled their collective spirit into creating a monumental ritual space first. Their complexity was expressed not in domestic security, but in sacred symbolism, not in protecting the family unit, but in forging a regional identity. This comparison makes not an anomaly, but a profound alternative. It represents a road not taken by the societies that would eventually build the first cities, or perhaps it represents the very foundation those later societies were built upon. It shows us that the Neolithic Revolution was not a monolithic event, but a mosaic of experiments. Some experiments focused on the economics of survival, while others, like the one on this Turkish hilltop, dared to invest first in the architecture of the human spirit, proving that sometimes the most practical thing a society can build is a place for its shared dreams. The stones hold a memory of smoke and celebration. Among the thousands of animal bones recovered from the fill of the enclosures, archaeologists found a clear and compelling story. These were not the scattered remains of everyday meals. They came predominantly from large, impressive game like aurochs, gazelle, and wild ass, and they bore the distinct marks of human activity. Precise cut marks showed where flesh was carefully removed from the bone, and many fragments were charred and blackened from intense, direct heat. This is the signature of feasting, not simple sustenance. The scale of the bone deposits points to something massive and communal, a recurring event where meat was cooked and consumed by hundreds of people gathered together. This transforms our understanding of the site's atmosphere. It was not a silent, austere temple. It was likely a place of vibrant, noisy gathering, where the scent of roasting meat filled the air, and the shared act of eating forged powerful social bonds. Feasting is one of humanity's oldest and most universal social technologies. Sharing a large meal does more than fill stomachs. It builds trust, reinforces a sense of belonging, and creates a tangible reward for collective effort. For the hunter-gatherer groups converging on the hill, participating in the feast would have been a powerful incentive, a celebration of their shared identity, and a direct benefit of their contributions to the construction work. The ritual of building and the ritual of eating were two parts of a single sacred cycle. The need to provision these enormous periodic feasts, however, introduced a formidable logistical challenge. How do you reliably feed a temporary city of builders and celebrants, week after week, season after season? You cannot depend solely on the luck of the hunt when you need to plan for hundreds. This practical pressure, born from a social and spiritual desire, may have been the critical spark for a new relationship with the environment. To ensure a predictable supply for the feasts, these communities would have been strongly motivated to manage the wild resources around them. They might have begun to deliberately protect herds of gazelle or aurochs, guiding their movements or safeguarding their grazing grounds. More significantly, they would have needed a reliable, storable carbohydrate to complement the meat. This could have driven the first steps toward cultivating wild stands of wheat and barley that grew in the surrounding hills. The feast, therefore, becomes a revolutionary engine. The desire to gather for a sacred purpose created the need for large-scale food provisioning, and that need, in turn, pushed people toward intentional intervention in the natural world. What began as a ritual act, a communal meal celebrating a shared belief, may have set in motion the very practices that would lead to agriculture and a permanently settled life. In this light, the economic transformation of the Neolithic was not a cold calculation of efficiency. It was heated by the fires of shared feasts, driven by the human yearning for community and meaning. The bones at it tell us that the path to domesticating plants and animals may have been paved with gratitude and celebration, a reminder that some of our most profound changes begin not with a tool, but with a meal shared among friends under an open sky. Their beliefs were the blueprint for every stone. While we can never hear their prayers or know their myths, the silent language of allows us to reconstruct the cognitive world of its builders, a field known as cognitive archaeology. This approach looks beyond the physical objects to understand the minds that created them. It asks not just what they built, but why they felt compelled to build it in this specific way. The sheer magnitude of their investment, sustained over centuries, is our first and greatest clue. It points to a shared belief system of immense power, a unifying ideology so compelling that it could coordinate the labor of hundreds, teach complex skills across 40 generations, and motivate people to return season after season to a remote hilltop. This was not a casual superstition. It was a foundational worldview, the operating system for their entire society. The carvings offer our most direct window into this mindset. The menagerie of powerful, wild animals is not random art. It suggests a universe where humans did not see themselves as separate from nature, but as participants in a living, spirited landscape. Every fox, scorpion, and soaring bird held meaning, possibly representing clan totems, ancestral guides, or spiritual forces that govern the world. This points to a form of totemism, where social groups identified with a particular animal, seeing it as a protector and a source of identity. Alternatively, the animals might represent powerful spirits that needed to be appeased through ritual or harnessed through symbolism to ensure community well-being. The T-shaped pillars themselves, interpreted as stylized human forms, strongly suggest a practice of ancestor veneration. These towering stone beings could represent watchful forebears, mythical founders, or deities, permanently present in the ritual space to oversee ceremonies and legitimize the social order. The entire site may have been designed as a sacred axis, a center of the world. In many ancient cosmologies, such a place was seen as the point of connection between heaven, earth, and the underworld, a conduit for spiritual power. By building these immense circles on this specific hill, the community may have been literally constructing their cosmic center, anchoring their worldview in the unshakable reality of limestone. This transforms our understanding of the construction process. Moving a 10-ton pillar was not merely engineering, it was likely a profound ritual act. Each phase, from quarrying to erection, could have been accompanied by ceremony, song, and story, imbuing the stone with meaning and power as it took its place in the sacred circle. The builders were not primitive laborers, they were ritual technicians, using physical exertion to manifest a spiritual vision. Their sophistication did not lie in written philosophy, but in a symbolic reasoning so advanced that it could organize an entire society around a shared dream for 1,000 years. To stand among these pillars is to stand inside a cathedral of thought, a monument to the human mind's innate power to build worlds from belief long before it ever built a city from brick. The mastery etched into every pillar suggests a deeper social story. Look closely at the carvings, not just at the animals they depict, but at the hand that made them. The flowing lines of a fox, the intricate scales of a snake, the balanced symmetry of the T-shapes themselves, this is not the work of amateurs. The quality is too high, and the style remains remarkably consistent across pillars carved centuries apart. This level of artistry and technical skill forces a fascinating question. Were there specialized craftspeople in our traditional view of hunter-gatherers, everyone is a generalist. Each person hunts, gathers, makes tools, and contributes to survival. The idea of a full-time sculptor, someone who does nothing but carve stone all day, seems out of place, yet the evidence in the limestone quietly argues otherwise. Achieving such refined work requires more than occasional practice. It demands a deep, accumulated knowledge of the material, an understanding of how to strike the stone to create a curve versus a straight line, and a mental library of symbolic forms that must be reproduced perfectly every time. This knowledge does not appear by accident. It is carefully curated, practiced, and most importantly, passed down. This transmission of expertise hints at a subtle but profound social innovation. While it is unlikely that these artists worked year-round, it is very possible that certain individuals or specific families became the keepers of this sacred craft. Within the community, they may have held a unique and respected status. Think of them not as employees but as ritual technicians. Their skill was not merely practical, it was spiritual. They were the translators, the ones who could take the shared visions and myths of the people and make them permanently visible in the world. By interfacing with the stone, they were literally giving form to the formless, making the gods and guardians tangible. This creates a very early and very gentle form of social differentiation. Here, status was not derived from controlling food stores or commanding armies. It was earned through esoteric knowledge and demonstrated ability. The master carver was revered because they possessed a gift that served the collective dream. This is a crucial distinction. It shows us a pathway to social complexity that begins with respect for skill, not fear of power. These specialized individuals were the precursors to the priestly and artisan classes that would later define civilizations. But they emerged from within a communal framework, their authority granted by their contribution to a shared spiritual endeavor, not by their dominance over others. The stones thus tell a story of talent being recognized and nurtured, suggesting that even in a society without kings, there were still masters. Individuals whose hands shaped the dreams of an entire culture for generations. The landscape itself was a partner in this great transformation. Did not rise from a barren wasteland, but from the very cradle of life. It sits in the northern reaches of the fertile Crescent, a sweeping arc of land stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. This was no marginal backwater. It was a region of astonishing natural wealth, a biological treasure chest. Wild grasses, the ancestors of modern wheat and barley, grew in thick stands across the hills. Herds of aurochs, gazelle, and wild sheep roamed the valleys. The potential for a new way of life was not a distant dream. It was literally underfoot, rustling in the wind and grazing on the plains. This environmental context is not a minor detail. It is a central character in the story. For a long time, a prevailing theory suggested that agriculture was born from desperation. The idea was that a changing climate or growing populations forced people in harsh, marginal environments to innovate or perish, to domesticate plants and animals out of sheer necessity. And its lush surroundings turn that logic on its head. The evidence here suggests the opposite may be true. Monumental building and the steps toward domestication may have first emerged not in a place of scarcity, but in a place of abundance. Why? Because abundance provides a safety net. When your basic needs are met by the rich wild resources around you, you have the luxury to experiment. You have the time and the security to invest labor in non-essential projects, like moving 50-ton stones up a hill. You can afford to take risks, to observe what happens if you protect a patch of wild wheat instead of simply harvesting it all. Innovation often flowers not when backs are against the wall, but when hands are free to tinker. This shifts the narrative from one of grim survival to one of creative opportunity. The people here were not desperately clawing a living from a stingy earth. They were engaged participants in a generous landscape, learning its rhythms and beginning to ask a revolutionary question: what if we could influence this bounty? Why then build on a hilltop, away from the water and the richest soils? The location is a powerful statement. From its summit, the builders would have had a panoramic view of that fertile world stretching to the horizon. They could see the animal herds moving, the stands of wild grain rippling. By placing their sacred circles here, they were establishing a symbolic center, a place of spiritual authority overlooking the source of their life. It was a platform from which to negotiate humanity's relationship with a wild and giving nature. The rituals performed among the stone pillars may have been acts of gratitude, of propitiation, or of attempted communion with the forces that govern this abundance. The hill was not an escape from the landscape, but a vantage point to better understand their place within it, setting the stage for the moment they would decide to reach down and actively shape that world. Beginning a partnership with the land that would change everything. The silent stones invite endless interpretation, for they speak a language we have forgotten. Scholars examining symbolism have proposed a constellation of theories, each one a different lens through which to view this ancient puzzle. Some researchers, meticulously measuring the orientations of the T-shaped pillars, have noted potential alignments with specific stars or the rising sun at solstices. This suggests the builders possessed a sophisticated, early form of astronomical knowledge, using the architecture to mark the passage of seasons and cosmic cycles. Anchoring their rituals to the grand clockwork of the heavens, the very shape of the enclosures offers another profound clue. Their circular form, dug into the ground and defined by surrounding stone walls, may have been intended to represent ceremonial houses or even symbolic womb-like spaces. Within these protective, earthbound circles, rituals of spiritual renewal and regeneration could have taken place, a symbolic return to a primal source to ensure the continuation of life and community. The pillars themselves, those towering T-shaped forms, are most powerfully interpreted as venerated ancestors. If this reading is correct, then each enclosure becomes a stone council of the honored dead. These silent figures, carved with belts and arms, would have stood as eternal witnesses, overseeing the ceremonies of their living descendants and legitimizing the social order through their perpetual presence. This creates a breathtaking concept, a community built not just for the living, but in constant dialogue with those who came before. The wild animal carvings add yet another layer. The fierce and dangerous beasts covering the pillars might symbolize the chaotic, threatening forces of the natural world that needed to be ritually controlled and appeased within the safety of the sacred circle. Alternatively, these animals could be totems, representing the different clans or family groups who traveled to the site. Each group might have carved its own emblematic creature into a pillar, physically embedding their identity into the collective monument, a stone signature marking their contribution to the shared dream. This beautiful plurality of theories does not mean one is right and the other's wrong. Instead, it reflects the profound richness of the site itself, likely served multiple, intertwined layers of meaning simultaneously. It was an astronomical observatory, a house of ritual rebirth, a gathering of stone ancestors, and a map of a social alliance all at once. The architecture was a verse of meaning, where a single pillar could be an ancestor, a clan symbol, and a marker for the winter solstice, depending on the ceremony and the participant. This depth is what makes the site so endlessly compelling and so hauntingly mysterious. We are left with fragments of a lost symphony, able to recognize a few distinct notes, the shape of a fox, the orientation of a stone, but forever separated from the full, resonant harmony that once filled this hilltop. The stones endure, but the specific stories, the names of the ancestors, the precise words of the prayers, have evaporated into time. What remains is the undeniable evidence of a complex symbolic mind, a society that could weave together astronomy, ancestry, and artistry into a single, monumental expression, proving that the need to make meaning is as old as humanity itself. Its greatest intervention is a quiet demolition of a simple story. For over a century, the Neolithic revolution was presented as a clean, logical sequence, a straightforward upgrade in human software. The narrative went like this: climate change or population pressure created a problem. Humans ingeniously solved it by domesticating plants and animals. This new farming economy produced a surplus. And that surplus then allowed for everything else: settled life, social hierarchy, and finally, monumental art and architecture. It was a story of cause and effect, with economics as the undeniable first cause. Stands in the middle of that timeline and calmly says, "Not so fast. The pillars were here first." This single fact shatters the linear model. It proves the transition was not a straight line from foraging to farming to temples. Instead, it reveals a tangled, dynamic feedback loop, a conversation between the human spirit and the material world. Think of it like this. The old story saw civilization as a building where the foundation was agriculture, the walls were settlement, and the ornate roof was culture and religion. Suggests the blueprint itself, the original design, was a cultural and spiritual vision. The desire to build something monumental, to gather for shared ritual and feasting, created a new kind of social machine. This machine, this temporary city of believers, then generated its own needs, particularly the need to feed itself reliably. That logistical pressure, born from a sacred purpose, likely pushed people to look at their environment in a new way, to begin managing wild grasses and protecting animal herds. In this light, agriculture emerges not as a brilliant discovery that enabled society, but as a practical innovation that sustained a society which already existed for other reasons. This turns the entire revolution inside out. It was not primarily an economic event with social consequences. It was an ideological transformation, a revolution in how people saw themselves and their place in the world, and that new vision had massive material consequences. The drive to create meaning literally reshaped the landscape. This is a much messier, more human story. It acknowledges that we are not purely rational actors optimizing for calories. We are storytellers, community builders, and meaning makers. Our greatest leaps forward often begin not with a calculation, but with a collective dream that demands to be made real. The stones ask us to see the Neolithic revolution not as a textbook diagram, but as a living process where faith, feast, and foundation were woven together in a complex dance that eventually gave birth to the world we know. Yet the very act of discovery brings its own profound responsibility. Exposing to the modern world after 12,000 years of protective slumber has introduced a delicate new chapter, one of preservation. The limestone pillars, once sheltered by tons of earth, now face the relentless sun, wind, and rain. Their intricate carvings, so miraculously preserved, are vulnerable to the gradual but steady wear of the elements. This presents a constant, careful balancing act for archaeologists. Each new excavation reveals a wonder, but it also exposes that wonder to potential harm. Ongoing conservation is not an optional extra, it is a critical race against time. Teams work to stabilize the stone, monitor for cracks, and sometimes even construct protective shelters over the most sensitive enclosures. All to ensure these silent teachers remain for future generations to study and experience. The challenge is immense, a reminder that uncovering the past is only the first step. Safeguarding it for the future is an endless commitment, and the work of uncovering is itself a task of staggering scale. What we have seen so far, those breathtaking circles, is merely the surface of a much deeper story. Ground-penetrating radar confirms that the vast majority of the site, perhaps over 95%, still lies undisturbed beneath the hill. Excavating completely, with the painstaking care it demands, is not a project that will be finished in our lifetimes. It is a legacy of discovery that will stretch across decades and very likely centuries. Each new season of digging holds the potential for a revelation that could refine our theories or force yet another rethinking. The next buried enclosure might contain a carving that clarifies the meaning of the T-shapes, or a new arrangement of pillars that reveals an unknown astronomical alignment. This slow, meticulous pace is not a shortcoming, it is the necessary rhythm of deep history. True understanding cannot be rushed, it must be unearthed one careful brushstroke at a time. This leads to the ultimate intellectual challenge, interpreting a world without words. offers no inscriptions, no clay tablets, no written records of any kind. Its language is entirely symbolic, written in stone and spatial arrangement. To translate this silent testimony, archaeologists cannot work alone. They must become detectives assembling a multidisciplinary team. Anthropologists provide insights into how hunter-gatherer societies organize and believe. Geologists analyze the stone sources and the ancient landscape. Specialists in iconography study the patterns and possible meanings behind the animal carvings, comparing them to symbols from later cultures. Sift through ancient soil samples to reconstruct the plant life of the era. Each discipline brings a different piece of the puzzle, and only by fitting them together can a fuller, though still incomplete, picture emerge. This collaborative effort underscores a beautiful truth about studying prehistory. It is a conversation between the present and the deep past, mediated by every tool of science and imagination we possess. These challenges, from preserving fragile stone to deciphering silent symbols, are not obstacles to be overcome and forgotten. They are integral to the story of itself. They remind us that unraveling the origins of civilization is not about finding a single, simple answer. It is a slow, evolving conversation with the evidence. Every new layer of soil removed, every new microscopic analysis of a bone fragment adds another sentence to a narrative we are still learning to read. The site teaches patience, humility, and the thrilling awareness that our current understanding is always provisional. The greatest revelation from Hill may still be waiting, buried just a few feet away, promising to once again reshape the story of who we are and how we began. This quiet hilltop in Turkey does not stand alone in its mystery. Its revolutionary message sends a tremor through archaeology that travels across oceans and continents, forcing a global re-examination of humanity's oldest monuments. Establishes a powerful new precedent, a clear case that the drive to build colossal sacred architecture can spring from a hunter-gatherer mind. This single fact becomes a key, unlocking fresh questions at familiar sites worldwide. It invites us to look again at the great stone circles of Europe, like the earliest phases of Stonehenge. For generations, the narrative held that such monuments were the products of settled, farming societies with established hierarchies. But what if their origins are older and more communal? The initial earthworks and timber structures at Stonehenge date to a time when agriculture in Britain was still in its early, perhaps patchy, stages. Could these first gestures on the landscape represent a similar impulse to the one at a gathering of different groups for seasonal rituals, their social complexity expressed not in villages, but in aligned posts and ditches carved into the chalk? The comparison is not about direct connection, but about parallel possibility. It suggests that across vast distances, human societies might have followed a similar cognitive and social pathway, where a shared belief system provided the initial spark for organizing labor and altering the earth. This perspective travels across the Atlantic as well. Consider the earliest monumental mounds in North America, like those at Poverty Point in Louisiana or Watson Brake. These vast earthen complexes, built thousands of years ago, have also puzzled researchers with their scale and sophistication relative to the foraging societies believed to have constructed them. The traditional model struggled to explain how people without full-scale agriculture could coordinate such efforts, offers a compelling alternative framework. It demonstrates that large-scale, coordinated construction is not the exclusive domain of agricultural kingdoms. It can emerge from a different social recipe, one where seasonal gatherings, ritual feasting, and a powerful collective ideology provide the necessary cohesion. This reframing is not about diminishing these sites, but about understanding them on their own terms. It liberates them from the old, linear timeline that demanded farming first, monuments later. Instead, we can see them as independent experiments in social complexity, where monument building itself was the central cultural project that held society together, possibly for centuries. The global implication is profound. It posits that the human impulse to collectively create large-scale symbolic landscapes is a deep-seated trait, a fundamental part of our social and cognitive toolkit. This impulse can manifest under diverse economic conditions, whether in the resource-rich foothills of the Fertile Crescent, the chalk downs of Britain, or the river valleys of North America. It suggests that civilization, in its broadest sense of complex, coordinated social life, has multiple origins and multiple blueprints. Some societies may have taken the path that led to kings and granaries, while others invested first in stone circles and ceremonial feasts, with agriculture evolving later as a support system for that sacred endeavor. Therefore, becomes more than an archaeological site, it becomes a new lens. Through it, the dawn of human monumentality no longer looks like the climax of a settled process, but like a brilliant, recurring dawn itself, a spark of collective imagination that could ignite in many places, teaching us that the desire to build meaning together may be one of the very first things that made us human. But what exactly do we call a place like this? The label temple has clung to from the start, a familiar word for an utterly unfamiliar reality. Yet that very familiarity may be a trap, subtly shaping how we see the past through the lens of our own present. When we hear temple, we often think of a dedicated building for worship, managed by a specialized priesthood, serving a settled community with established doctrines. It is an image drawn from the world of later civilizations, from the Parthenon to the great cathedrals. To impose that template onto this Turkish hilltop, however, risks missing its radical originality. The function of this space was almost certainly more fluid, more integrated into the total fabric of life than our modern categories allow. Imagine it not as a single-purpose chapel, but as a multi-use community center for a society without towns. This was a ceremonial gathering place, where people from distant areas reaffirmed alliances through shared ritual. It was a grand feasting hall, where the bones of wild aurochs and gazelle testify to massive communal meals. It likely served as a workshop, where master carvers practiced their sacred craft on the very pillars that surrounded them. And it may have been a venue for rites of passage, where young individuals were initiated into the knowledge of their people, or for vibrant seasonal festivals that marked the turning of the year and the migrations of the herds. Some researchers, wary of the baggage the word temple carries, suggest more open terms like cult building or communal ritual structure. These phrases attempt to sidestep later connotations, pointing instead to a collective activity, a doing rather than just a believing. This semantic debate is far from trivial. It highlights the profound difficulty we face when trying to understand a prehistoric mindset with a vocabulary born later. Our language is built on distinctions, sacred versus secular, work versus ritual, home versus temple. Those distinctions may have barely existed. The act of quarrying a pillar could have been as holy as the ceremony held beside it once it was raised. The feast was both a social celebration and a spiritual offering. This challenges us to remain open, to resist the urge to neatly file this place into a familiar drawer. The social dynamics humming within these stone circles may not have a direct modern equivalent. They represent a unique fusion of purpose, where every activity, from carving to eating to gathering, was woven into a single, sacred tapestry of community life. To call it merely a temple might be to see only one thread. The true picture is the entire, vibrant fabric, a way of being in the world that organized itself around a hilltop, building not just monuments, but the very idea of what it meant to belong together. The story of does not end with its burial. Its cultural echo resonates across the landscape and through time. As archaeologists expanded their search, they began to find its signature elsewhere. At sites like and slightly younger but still astonishingly ancient, they uncovered a familiar sight, the distinct, imposing form of the T-shaped pillar. These pillars were smaller and the sites less grandiose, but the symbolic language was unmistakably the same. This was not a coincidence. It was evidence of a shared cultural world. The people who built were not an isolated cult. They belonged to what scholars now call a T-shaped pillar culture, a widespread tradition that flourished across southeastern Anatolia for well over 1,000 years. This discovery transforms from a solitary wonder into the crowning achievement of a sophisticated, regional civilization. It was not an anomaly, but the epicenter, the most magnificent and ambitious expression of a belief system that united people across a vast territory. Imagine this not as a single, flickering flame in the darkness, but as a cultural hearth, a central fire whose light and warmth spread for miles in every direction. The consistent symbols, the architectural template of the enclosures, and the focus on monumental stonework tell us that ideas, artisans, and perhaps even ritual specialists traveled between these hills, maintaining a common vision across generations. This connected network suggests a level of cultural cohesion we never before attributed to this era. Therefore, may represent something even more foundational than a temple complex. It could be the spiritual and cultural nucleus from which later Neolithic societies in Anatolia and the Levant gradually grew. The practices honed there, the social models of seasonal gathering and cooperative labor, the symbolic lexicon of animals and ancestors, likely seeped into the fabric of neighboring communities. When people eventually settled into more permanent villages focused on farming, they did not start with a blank slate. They carried with them the intellectual and social legacy of the pillar builders. The monumental impulse softened and adapted, but its core, the human drive to create shared meaning through ritual and symbol, had already been cemented into the region's identity. In this light, the hilltop is not a dead end in human history. It is a profound beginning. It stands as the spectacular core of a regional phenomenon, the place where a powerful set of ideas about community, the cosmos, and humanity's place within it first crystallized into stone, setting a cultural trajectory that would quietly influence the birth of the world we know. The stones themselves held the memory. To sustain a project across 40 generations, the people have relied on something more durable than parchment, a living library of shared knowledge passed from elder to youth through the spoken word. Every technical skill, from selecting the right limestone seam to balancing a pillar in its socket, had to be taught and remembered without a single written manual. The precise layout of the enclosures, the specific meanings behind each carved animal, and the sequences of ritual action performed within the circles. All of this formed a complex cultural package that traveled through time on the breath of storytellers and the hands of mentors. This reveals a profound truth often overlooked in our literate world. Oral traditions are not primitive or simple. They are sophisticated, resilient systems of information storage, capable of preserving intricate details across centuries with remarkable fidelity. The stability of the site's design, repeating over generations, is a testament to the power of this spoken curriculum. It suggests a formalized process of learning, where master builders and ritual specialists held a revered role as the keepers of essential knowledge, ensuring that the sacred geometry of their world never wavered. This transmission was not a dry recitation of facts. It was woven into the very fabric of life through myth, song, and ceremony. The stories told around fires would have explained why the hill was sacred, who the stone ancestors represented, and what the great birds and prowling foxes symbolized. These narratives gave context to the labor, transforming a backbreaking engineering task into a participatory chapter in an epic, ongoing story. The site itself acted as a powerful mnemonic device, a physical anchor for memory. A young apprentice learning to carve a snake would not just be taught a technique. He would be told the story of the snake, its role in the cosmology, and its connection to a particular clan or season. The pillar was not just a stone, it was a chapter in 3 dimensions. To stand in the enclosure was to stand inside the living story of the people, surrounded by the tangible characters of their mythic world. This interplay between place and narrative created a self-reinforcing cycle. The monument gave the stories a permanent home, and the stories gave the monument its enduring purpose. This demonstrates that the absence of writing does not mean an absence of complexity, history, or high culture. Literate societies are fully capable of building and sustaining elaborate cultural institutions through the sophisticated tools of shared practice, ritual repetition, and communal narrative. The continuity lasting longer than most modern nations have existed, stands as a monumental rebuke to the idea that civilization requires written records. Their records were etched into tradition, performed in ceremony, and embodied in the landscape itself. The hill was their archive, the rituals their living texts, and the collective memory of the people their most sacred and enduring technology. It challenges us to expand our definition of what it means to know, to remember, and to build a legacy. For over 1,000 years, they maintained a visionary project through the strength of a shared story, proving that some blueprints are not drawn on clay, but carried in the heart and voiced across the generations. Strong enough to move mountains and leave a whisper in the stone that echoes into our time. Around 8,200 years before the Common Era, the rhythm of the hammerstones on the hill began to slow. The gatherings grew smaller, the intervals between them longer, until finally, the last great enclosure was carefully filled with earth and sealed. The long conversation between the people and their stone ancestors fell silent. What brought about this end? The timeline offers a compelling clue, as the site's decline coincides with a dramatic shift in the global climate, known today as the 8.2 event. This was not a local drought, but a rapid, worldwide cooling that lasted for centuries, bringing drier conditions to the Fertile Crescent. For a society whose very existence relied on the seasonal convergence of people from across a wide landscape, such an environmental shift could have been profoundly disruptive. The predictable migrations of wild herds may have faltered, the stands of wild grains may have become less reliable, straining the intricate social networks that had sustained the pilgrimage and construction cycles for over a millennium. The logistical web that fed the feasts and motivated the labor could have simply unraveled under the pressure of a changing world. Yet, to see this only as a collapse misses a deeper, more transformative possibility. Perhaps the site's purpose had, in a profound sense, been fulfilled. The very social and ideological innovations pioneered at the cooperative models and the managed relationship with nature may have sown the seeds for a new way of life. The agricultural practices it likely encouraged were, by this time, becoming more established in permanent villages across the region. People were no longer mobile hunter-gatherers converging on a sacred hill. They were becoming settled farmers, their lives and rituals anchored to their fields and their homes. The need for a massive, regional ceremonial center may have simply faded as society reorganized itself around the village, the harvest, and a more localized form of community. In this light, the deliberate burial of the final enclosures was not an act of defeat, but a ceremonial closing of a monumental chapter. The knowledge, the symbols, and the social bonds did not vanish. They likely dispersed and transformed, carried by people into their new, settled lives. The end of therefore may represent the most successful kind of ending, not a failure but an evolution. The cultural revolution it sparked had become so integrated into daily life that the colossal engine which started it was no longer necessary. The hill returned to quiet, its greatest work complete, having gently guided humanity across a threshold into a new world, leaving behind a question as resonant as its pillars. Whether the greatest monuments are those that stand forever, or those that teach us how to change, and then gracefully allow themselves to be reclaimed by the earth, the silent stones have not remained confined to academic journals. Has erupted into the modern imagination, becoming a fixture in popular culture and a canvas for our deepest curiosities. Its story is now told in high-profile documentaries, featured in best-selling books, and discussed across countless online forums. This widespread fascination speaks to something profound within us, a collective yearning for mystery and a sense that our history holds grand, untold secrets. The site's very defiance of the old timeline has, understandably, opened a door for more speculative interpretations. In the absence of a complete explanation, some narratives have emerged proposing connections to lost advanced civilizations or even extraterrestrial guidance. While these ideas capture a sense of wonder, it is crucial to note they are not supported by the meticulous archaeological evidence gathered over decades. Yet, their very popularity is a telling symptom. It underscores just how deeply disrupts our conventional, comfortable story of the past. The site is so revolutionary that it can feel to some like it must belong to a different narrative entirely, one far outside our established framework. This reaction in itself is a testament to the site's power. It has become a global symbol for human mystery and untapped potential, a permanent reminder that the textbook is never truly closed. For the local community in and for the nation of Turkey, carries a different, equally powerful meaning. It is a profound source of cultural pride and a touchstone of national heritage. The hill is no longer just hill. It is a celebrated landmark, a point of pilgrimage for tourists and scholars alike, and a UNESCO World Heritage Site recognized as belonging to all humanity. This status highlights a beautiful truth that ancient history is never truly ancient. It is a living resource, continuously shaping modern identity, fostering a sense of connection to a deep and illustrious past. The site's management and preservation are now a matter of both local stewardship and global importance, ensuring that this chapter of the human story remains accessible for generations to come. In this way, performs a dual magic. It simultaneously pushes the boundaries of our historical understanding, while rooting a modern community more firmly in its own legendary landscape. Proving that the most enduring discoveries do not just change what we know about the past, they change how we see ourselves in the present. The quiet hill still holds its deepest secrets close. While the monumental pillars have been revealed, the living world of the people who raised them remains veiled in shadow, a fact that drives every new season of work on the windswept plateau. Excavations and research here are far from over. They are an ongoing conversation with the past, and each answer uncovers a dozen new, more intricate questions. One of the most pressing puzzles is the practical mechanics of this ancient endeavor. Who exactly funded and directed such staggering labor over centuries? We see no palaces for kings, no storehouses for a controlling elite. This absence suggests a model of social organization unlike the hierarchies we know from later history. Perhaps the project was sustained through a form of ritual obligation, where different clans or family groups took responsibility for specific pillars or enclosures as an act of devotion and social prestige. The funding, if we can even use that term, may have been the collective contribution of time, skill, and food from the entire participating community, a shared investment in their common spiritual future. Without written records of accounts or commands, we are left reading the social structure from the stones themselves, and their story is one of cooperation rather than coercion. Equally elusive are the specific rituals that animated these stone circles. We have the stage, but the performance remains a mystery. The animal bones speak of grand feasting, a powerful communal activity. But what ceremonies preceded or followed the meal? Were there processions around the rings? Did ritual specialists, perhaps early shamans, perform acts of mediation between the stone ancestors and the living community? Were there offerings placed at the bases of the pillars, or recitations of myths that explained the carved menagerie? The absence of any depiction of human ritual activity in the carvings is itself a fascinating clue. It may indicate that the ceremonies were so well known they needed no illustration, or that the focus was entirely on the powerful symbols of the human world. The silent architecture holds the echo of chanting, of movement, of focused intention, but the specific words and gestures have dissolved into time. This leads directly to the puzzle of decision-making. How was a project of this scale and duration planned and executed without a central, permanent authority? The consistency of design across centuries implies a strong, stable tradition, a set of rules passed down. But who made the decisions about when to start a new enclosure, or which clan would carve which animal? It suggests a form of council, perhaps composed of elders from the different groups that gathered at the site, or of ritual specialists who interpreted the will of the ancestors or the signs in the natural world. Their authority would have been rooted in respect, knowledge, and spiritual insight, not in permanent political power. This model of distributed, consensus-based leadership challenges our deepest assumptions about how complex tasks are accomplished, pointing to a social intelligence we are only beginning to appreciate. Then there is the silent language of the abstract symbols. Scattered among the vivid animal carvings are enigmatic geometric signs, like the H-shaped motifs or simple crescents. These are not pictures of anything in the natural world. They are pure symbols, and their meaning is locked away. Could the H sign represent a doorway, a portal between worlds, or a schematic view of one of the enclosures themselves? Might the crescents be early representations of the moon, marking lunar cycles that dictated the timing of gatherings? These abstract forms are perhaps the most tantalizing clues of all, because they represent a leap into pure conceptual thought. They are evidence of a symbolic system, a code that organized ideas about the cosmos, social structure, or spiritual concepts. Deciphering this code is like trying to read a book where we know the alphabet but not the language. This is why the work continues with such careful urgency. Each new season of excavation, not only at itself but at the surrounding sister sites promises new pieces for this vast puzzle. Deeper analysis of the existing data, from soil samples to tool marks, using ever more advanced technology, can reveal microscopic details about diet, craftsmanship, and the environment. Every new discovery holds the potential to confirm our current theories, refine them in subtle ways, or challenge them entirely, sending researchers back to the drawing board. This dynamic, evolving process is the lifeblood of archaeology. It ensures that we'll remain not a static museum exhibit, but a living question at the forefront of debate, a constant reminder that the story of our origins is still being written. One careful brushstroke at a time, the final, and perhaps most liberating, rethinking demands is a fundamental one, about the very definition of civilization itself. For too long, we have treated civilization like a checklist, a series of boxes to be ticked off on humanity's march forward. Writing, check. Cities, check. Metallurgy, check. Once a society accumulated enough of these traits, it was granted the title, considered to have arrived at a superior state of being. This checklist created a clear hierarchy in our historical imagination, with complex empires at the top and simpler foraging societies somewhere near the bottom of the ladder of progress. Dismantles this entire framework. It presents us with a society that possessed none of those classic checklist items, yet undeniably achieved something profoundly civilized. They created monumental art of breathtaking scale and sophistication. They orchestrated complex social cooperation across a wide region, sustaining it for over 1,000 years. They cultivated specialized knowledge in engineering and symbolic artistry, passing it down flawlessly through generations. And they engaged in profound symbolic thought, building an entire landscape to articulate their relationship with the cosmos and the spirit world. Every one of these achievements is a core component of what we value in a civilization. The site proves these capacities were not inventions of the city or the state. They were innate human potentials that could blossom under the right social and ideological conditions, long before the invention of the plow or the palace. This realization expands the timeline of civilization's development by pushing its origins back into a misty prehistory we once considered simple. More importantly, it democratizes those origins. It recognizes the intellectual and organizational brilliance of hunter-gatherer societies, granting them their rightful place not as primitive precursors, but as innovative architects of their own complex worlds. They were not waiting to become civilized. They were already living a sophisticated form of it, expressed in a different dialect, a dialect of stone and symbol rather than brick and bureaucracy. In this light, civilization ceases to be a fixed destination, a finish line crossed when a certain technology is invented. It becomes a long, slow, and beautifully nonlinear process. It is the story of evolving human connection and expression, a gradual deepening of our ability to collaborate, to create meaning, and to leave a collective mark on the world. This process has many possible starting points, many different paths, and many diverse expressions. The path that led to pyramids and emperors is just one route the human experiment took. Represents another, a road that invested first in the architecture of belief, demonstrating that the cradle of civilization was not a single geographic location, but the limitless landscape of the human mind. Our history is not a straight line from simple to complex, but a sprawling tree with countless branches, each one a valid and brilliant exploration of what it means to build a world together. But the narrative of a revolution is not a monolith, and within the halls of archaeology, healthy skepticism provides the necessary counterpoint. Not every scholar interprets the stones as a complete overturning of the old order. While the site's staggering age and its hunter-gatherer context are now beyond serious dispute, the most sweeping conclusions drawn from it remain the subject of vigorous and essential debate. These critical perspectives are not a dismissal of the site's importance, but rather a careful insistence on precision, ensuring that our new story is built on rock-solid evidence. Not just revolutionary enthusiasm. The most significant caution centers on the proposed causal chain, the elegant idea that the temple literally built agriculture. Critics rightly point out that while the timing and location are suggestive, a direct, proven link is still largely hypothetical. The evidence shows two revolutionary phenomena occurring in the same region at roughly the same time: monumental construction and the dawn of cultivation. Proving that one caused the other, however, is an enormous leap. It is a compelling and logical theory, perhaps the best one we have, but it is not yet a settled fact. The archaeological record has not yet yielded a clear, smoking gun, like a buried enclosure filled with the earliest known domesticated grains specifically grown to feed its builders. This gap invites a more nuanced possibility that both monument building and early plant management were parallel expressions of a deeper social transformation. Two branches growing from the same trunk of increasing cultural complexity, rather than one being the direct engine of the other. Another point of debate questions the very label we give to the builders. Were they truly pure hunter-gatherers in the classic sense of small, highly mobile bands with no permanent impact on their landscape? Some researchers suggest that by 11,000 years ago, communities in this abundant region might have already been practicing a form of low-level resource management or cultivation. They could have been what anthropologists call complex hunter-gatherers, societies with rich symbolic lives and territorial attachments, who may have already been tending wild stands of plants or selectively hunting certain herds long before the first stone pillar was raised. In this view, would not represent a leap from simple foraging to complex society, but rather the spectacular monumental expression of a society that was already on a path toward greater complexity and environmental manipulation. This debate refines rather than refutes the revolution. It asks us to see the transition not as a sudden Big Bang, but as a slow, bright dawn, with many subtle shifts occurring before the first monumental stones were ever. These scholarly discussions are not weaknesses in the story, they are its strength. They are the scientific process at work, a collective effort to test every assumption and weigh every piece of evidence. This rigorous back and forth ensures that our understanding of remains dynamic and evidence-based, protecting it from becoming merely a symbol for romantic speculation. Engaging with these critiques does not diminish the site's wonder, it deepens our respect for the complexity of the past. It reminds us that history, especially prehistory, is rarely a simple tale of before and after. It is a mosaic of overlapping possibilities, a conversation between the silent evidence and our endless attempts to give it a voice. The stones themselves do not change, but our conversation about them must, evolving with each new discovery and each thoughtful challenge. Ensuring that the story we tell is as robust and enduring as the limestone from which it is carved. The silent pillars of that Turkish hilltop did more than rewrite a timeline, they rewrote an entire discipline. Greatest impact may not lie in the distant past it reveals, but in the immediate present of how we choose to study it. For generations, archaeology operated under a powerful theoretical framework, one that saw human history primarily as a material struggle. The driving forces were environmental pressures, the search for food, and the economics of survival. In this view, ideas, beliefs, and rituals were considered secondary, a kind of cultural decoration that appeared only after the basic problems of subsistence had been solved. They were the superstructure built atop the solid economic base. A place with no houses but immense symbolic investment challenged that hierarchy at its core. Here was undeniable proof that the human drive to create meaning could be the primary catalyst. Mobilizing labor and organizing society on a grand scale long before traditional economic drivers like agriculture were in place. This validation has permanently shifted the theoretical landscape. Archaeologists can no longer relegate ideology to the sidelines as a mere byproduct. They must now consider it as a potential prime mover, a force capable of shaping economies and social structures from the very beginning. The site stands as a monumental case study that ideas are not just reflections of how people live, they are blueprints for how they decide to live together. This shift has breathed new life and credibility into specifics of archaeology that once operated on the margins. Cognitive archaeology, which seeks to understand the ancient mind, its symbols, and its thought processes, is no longer a speculative exercise. It is the essential toolkit. To understand why those T-shaped pillars were carved with boars and birds, we must engage with the symbolic universe of the builders. We must ask what those animals meant, how they related to concepts of clan identity, spiritual power, or cosmic order. Similarly, the field of symbolic archaeology, which interprets the use of signs and representations, finds its ultimate classroom in those limestone canvases. The site demonstrates that symbolic expression is not a luxury of complex states, but a fundamental human activity that can structure entire societies. By giving weight to these approaches, has encouraged archaeologists to look beyond the practical, to listen for the stories whispered in the arrangement of stones and the choice of motifs. It asks researchers to be interpreters of meaning as much as of objects, to see the ancient world not just as a collection of tools and bones, but as a network of ideas made manifest. Furthermore, the site has fundamentally redirected the archaeological gaze regarding where to look for societal origins. For decades, the focus was almost exclusively on settlements, the tells and villages where people lived, cooked, and stored their grain. These places told the story of daily life, of adaptation and domestication. Forcefully argued that this story was incomplete. To understand how societies become complex, we must also investigate where they dream together. Ceremonial centers, once seen as derivative of settled life, are now understood as potential crucibles for that very process. The hilltop teaches us that the spaces where people gather for shared ritual are laboratories for social innovation, where new forms of cooperation, leadership, and collective identity are forged. This has prompted a wave of new investigations at similar domestic sites around the world, from the earliest earthworks in the Americas to remote stone arrangements previously dismissed as insignificant. The legacy is a more balanced archaeology, one that excavates the home and the temple with equal seriousness, recognizing that human evolution happens in both the kitchen and the sanctuary. Ultimately, the enduring legacy is a more holistic and interdisciplinary practice. It has broken down the old walls between specialties. To unravel its mysteries, you cannot just be an expert in stone tools or animal bones. You must collaborate with geologists, climatologists, iconographers, and anthropologists. You must weave together data from soil samples, celestial alignments, and comparative mythology. This collaborative model acknowledges that ancient people did not live compartmentalized lives, and neither should our study of them. The site demands that we take the beliefs, social ingenuity, and imaginative leaps of prehistoric people as seriously as we take their milling stones and hearths. It asks us to see them not as primitive economic actors, but as thoughtful architects of their own reality. In doing so, has forever changed the questions we ask when we put a trowel into the earth. We no longer dig solely to find out what people ate or how they built their homes. We dig to understand what they believed, what they feared, and what they hoped for, recognizing that these intangible forces are the very bedrock upon which civilizations are built. stands as a silent, stone rebuttal to simplistic histories. For over a century, the story of our ascent was a clean, ascending line, a predictable march from simple survival to complex society. This ancient hilltop erases that line entirely. It proves that our ancestors' capacity for grandeur, for coordinated action and profound symbolic thought, ignited thousands of years before we ever imagined possible. The timeline we once trusted has been permanently redrawn, not by a theory, but by the physical fact of multi-ton pillars carved by hands that belong to a world we thought we understood. This is not a minor adjustment to the record. It is a fundamental of human potential. The builders were not primitive figures stumbling toward the light of civilization. They were its architects, working from a blueprint of belief we are only beginning to decipher. Their achievement forces a profound humility upon us. It asks us to look at the distant past not as a series of crude steps, but as a landscape of brilliant, parallel experiments in what it means to be human together. The old, tidy narrative of progress, where farming inevitably led to villages, which then led to temples, has been abandoned. In its place, we must embrace a messier, more dynamic, and infinitely more fascinating story. This new story recognizes that human development is not a straight road, but a web of interconnected possibilities. At its seams belief built the first temples. The compelling need to gather, to perform shared ritual, and to create a permanent home for invisible forces provided the initial spark. That collective spiritual endeavor then created a new social reality, a temporary city of believers with unprecedented logistical needs. And it was those needs, the practical challenge of feeding hundreds of people gathered for a sacred purpose, that may have sown the very first seeds of intentional cultivation. The temple, in a very real sense, may have taught people how to farm. This turns the traditional sequence inside out, placing the human drive for meaning at the very center of the great Neolithic transformation. The economic revolution was not the cause, but a consequence of a social and ideological one. This perspective challenges us to look at all of prehistory with fresh eyes. Where we once saw only the slow grind of subsistence, we must now also see the powerful currents of dream and symbol. Where we once cataloged tools and bones, we must now listen for the echoes of ceremony and story. The roots of civilization are not a single, thick taproot buried in the invention of agriculture. They are a tangled, deep rhizome, a subterranean network of social ingenuity, environmental opportunity, and spiritual yearning that spread in unexpected directions long before breaking the surface. This understanding is full of surprise, and it is far from complete. Every season of excavation at and its sister sites promises new questions as much as new answers. The silent stones guard their secrets closely, reminding us that for every mystery solved, a deeper one awaits. As we leave the hill of we carry with us a transformed understanding. Civilization did not emerge from a single invention, like the plow or the written word. It emerged from a fundamental human drive, a drive to create, to gather, and to make meaning together. It is a drive that can organize the movement of mountains, inspire artistry across generations, and gently guide humanity across a threshold into a new world. The legacy of is not a list of corrected dates. It is a renewed sense of wonder for the depth and creativity of the human spirit, a spirit that, 12,000 years ago, looked at a bare hill and saw a cathedral, teaching us that our first and greatest monument was always the shared dream itself.